this is huge cultural change that we're
Right.
looking for. And we know that those things take a long time.
Hi, Jamila. It's great to see you.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You did this really interesting quantitative research about Me Too and what was actually happening on social media.
We actually collected all of these tweets. I'm working with a computer scientist at Georgetown, and then another of my colleagues at the law school. And we got over 20 million the first year.
Wow.
So then it's declined since then. So now we're on year 2 and then moving into year 3 to analyze these over time.
So what did you see about how and when that hashtag was used?
Yeah, so it was a lot of the activity was in that very first day. So I think it was about 1 million tweets. So this is in 2017. Remember, Alyssa Milano put out that tweet and said, everyone, if you have a similar experience, you tweet Me Too.
What was driving the use of the hashtag in 2018?
There was International Women's Day. That was really big. So there was a lot of publicity around that. So when Les Moonves resigned, there was activity around that. Bill Cosby's sentence, also the Kavanaugh hearings too. We saw another spike around that. We weren't necessarily expecting the activity to be so high. That was almost a full year after.
Yeah.
So there was all this talk, well, maybe this was just one spike and then, it was trendy and went viral and then it would just sort of phase out. And it did phase out for a number of months. But then all of a sudden, when we got the Les Moonves as well as Kavanaugh, then we saw the activity come back up.
Oh, it's so funny because I remember during the Kavanaugh hearings, everyone was always like, is Me Too dead? I feel like that's everyone's favorite question. Is Me Too dead?
Yeah, and the question is, what do you call dead, right? So are you thinking just about Twitter? So this is all the Twitter activity, right? So are you talking about when people are literally using hashtag Me Too on Twitter? But then you have to also look at what's happening offline. So that's part of what I like to connect is Me Too is still a whole movement, social movement that's happening online and offline. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's dead just because sometimes we see these declines in the online hashtag being used.
So what are the big things that you saw that were happening offline?
Well, I look at the legal as well as the other types of activity. So other protests that are happening. So we saw the Google walkouts, we saw the McDonald's strike. That was a historic strike early on. We saw all of this new EEOC activity in terms of that. We saw lots of companies doing more trainings around it. Time's Up Legal Defense Fund that I was tracking, the legislation as well. So I have a whole data set tracking all of the federal and state, not a lot of action on the federal level, but the state level. There have been lots of bills introduced, not as many passed. So, but a lot of them are still sort of in the works and at least in the conversation.
I thought it was really interesting, the analysis you did about public officials who were accused of misconduct.
So we went and just scoured the public record to look at all of the allegations that were coming out. And they were senators, U.S. representatives, they were judges, other officials. So I kind of went in and then looked and tracked them to see what was the outcome. I wanted to look to see how it affected the elections as well, the midterm elections.
This graph to me is really surprising. I did not expect to see such a big gap between, the number of people who were accused and the number of people who are still remain in office. So all those folks who are not in office anymore, what happened to them?
Yeah, so that was the funny thing that we weren't expecting necessarily, because the harassment, like in these different government offices, is not new, but typically it's quiet, right? So they keep it secret, they have secret settlement, but that's how it's been handled traditionally. This time there was more accountability. So people resigning midterm, right? Or people saying that, deciding that they aren't going to run again for the next election, or retiring. Why are you out of the blue now retiring?
Well, so I wanted to ask about Joe Biden, because he's, that's the Me Too story in the news these days.
So, of course, that's been on a lot of people's minds. And then there's conversations about, some think that we're too forgiving of him. And these are even people who support the Me Too movement are saying, well, look, you have to take these allegations seriously too, even if you want a Democratic candidate, and even if you want to, you have issues with Trump and the way the current administration is running things, you still have to take this seriously. So I think for me, it's just unfortunate that we have to choose between the two top candidates who both have problems with this, even if one is way worse, right? When you're talking about a serial perpetrator and rape allegations, like tons of harassment, compared to one allegation, it still is like, I wish we could have candidates who didn't know, who didn't even toe that line in terms of what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate.
People sometimes think about Me Too like that, like they think it's like the ultimate trump card. Like it'll overcome every obstacle known to man. Like, oh, if Kavanaugh gets confirmed, Me Too is dead. It's like, Me Too is not going to overcome like a vast political machine that wants Kavanaugh confirmed. Like it's powerful, but it can't do everything.
And it can't do everything, and it can't do everything all at once, right? So I look at the incremental changes, and the incremental progress is still progress. So no, everything isn't resolved overnight, but we have hotel workers who are now protected better, right? And we have people speaking up more and reporting more. We have more conversation about bystander intervention. We have more accountability with the government officials. This is huge cultural change that we're looking for, and we know that those things take a long time. So we'll see. We still have to keep tracking it, and that's part of why I like the data and the empirical piece and tracking some of these bills and the cases, and so sort of what the accountability looks over time. Right now, still only in year 3, it's still short. Still not a lot of data points.
You're a true scientist. You're like 20 million. We don't have a lot of data.
I know. I love the data. That's why you see me with all these figures and charts. I like to look at the numbers and see what stories the numbers are telling. So part of it is like, I want to jump ahead a little bit to see, okay, we have all these bills, but how is it going to be enforced? We have lots of lack of coverage. So that's another big issue. Lots of employees that and workers, so independent contractors, domestic workers, farm workers, all types of workers who just fall outside of the protection of law. So we know we have lots of problems. So we need to see how the reforms happen, and then also what happens in the courts once we do get these reforms in place. And then more broadly, what happens culturally with this conversation. So I'm staying tuned for all that.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, I know. It's a big project. And my next step too, I'm looking specifically at intersectionality. That's one of the things that was talked about a lot too, are women of color and low wage workers, particularly left out and left behind. So part of my next project is to pay even closer attention to that with the outcomes.